This is Randy Heffner. I'm sorry, I was on mute there just a moment ago. But yes, APIs and this notion of enterprise transformation, and there's a lot of conversation about notions of digital business and digital business transformation and the like. And there's a lot that APIs can do to help with this major kind of transformation. And for many in the IT community that may be architects or developers, the conversation about APIs may hit you at a smaller level, not a big enterprise transformation level, but at a smaller level about just get this done or get that done. And that's good. You got to drive the business forward in these ways, but engaging with this broader conversation of enterprise transformation, whether you are an architect or a developer or a business analyst or a corporate strategist or other, the important thing to understand is that you can be a change agent from wherever you are in the organization if you understand the context of digital transformation. And particularly for architects and developers, what you have been doing or will be doing with service-oriented architecture and APIs is key to what you can enable your organization to do from an enterprise transformation perspective. So that's what we want to focus on, is give you that broader context and an understanding of how the design that you're doing for any sort of API or SOA initiative fits into the larger context. A good place to start the conversation is understanding how more than a decade ago, Amazon.com, the retail store, created basically a kickstart for the API economy. It took a long while for it to catch on after that, but Amazon had their website, and they were in the process of going through a major re-architecting of their website for scalability and a broader base of flexibility with their site and faster ability to rapidly change their site and the capabilities they had on it. As part of that transformation, they had this realization that they could put APIs behind their website, and through those APIs open up the ability for any mom and pop website, big websites, small websites, boutique web design shops to become an Amazon presence through what's now known as the Amazon Product Advertising API. And so this gave Amazon a much broader and wider presence across the internet and many more points of presence for selling out of Amazon's product catalog. But here's the important thing to understand at a business strategy level, what was going on with that shift with opening up APIs is that Amazon switched from choosing its partners to letting its partners choose it in a much more open way, an open business, and really a start of the API economy. So it took a few years till we started to have the likes of Facebook and Twitter and their open APIs that began to broaden the API conversation and to make it a top-level industry conversation. But this and some similar things going on at eBay were really the start of an open business model. A lot was going on at this time as well with SOA conversations and external SOA interfaces between businesses, primarily in a B2B sense, but that was among tighter, smaller communities versus the API economy thrust of being open to anyone, anywhere, any kind of new way, new channel to market. But this conversation then starts leading to some interesting case studies that are developing at corporate enterprise level, and I'll give a couple of B2B examples just to show how the B2B conversation is shifting with open APIs. The first case study that I want to talk about is an Indian bank. The bank had a number of different commercial customers, but one in particular, a distribution firm. And the distribution firm had a business problem that involved order processing, so fundamentally not a bank kind of problem, but here's the way that it worked, and here's what the bank did to add value to this customer and the results. So the distribution firm's customers would place an order with the distribution firm, either a web app or call center, but they were not comfortable paying for it online, or via giving their credit card number out on a call, or many of them didn't have credit cards and the like. So they would place the order, and then they would go to the bank and say, well, send some money to the distribution firm, and that set up a big reconciliation problem, and then thus an order processing problem. Well, the bank talked with the distribution firm about the kinds of business processes that were going on here, and they set up a scenario that had APIs both into and out of the bank. You'll see what I mean here. So here's the solution they wound up with. Now the distribution firm's customer places the order just like they did before, and then they get an order number. Well, they take that order number to the bank, and they'll go up to a teller. The teller now has a payment function on their screen. They enter the order number via an API into the order system at the distribution firm. They get the precise monetary amount that's due on the order, and a confirmation that in fact that is a valid order. And then the customer gives the bank teller money either in cash or by saying transfer it from this account or that account. And then the bank teller makes the payment happen, puts it into the distribution firm's account, and then calls a separate API that records the payment and immediately releases the order. So this takes the whole reconciliation process out of the order fulfillment cycle for customers doing this approach. And then later on, the distribution firm can call a status API, and for any needs that they have for reconciling the payment and the like. Well, this is just one of a growing cadre of API-based scenarios that this bank is doing, which is basically changing the basis of competition to CIO conversations. And this change of the basis of competition is a key theme in API processing and the API economy. So I took a little time with that case study because I wanted to kind of show and highlight the way that this is the bank entering into processes that are not typical financial management processes, but instead they're solving problems for their customers. And that's what changes the basis of competition for them. There's a telco example here, and this is European telco. And via their SOA strategy, they were creating a number of business services with SOA that were used by internal solutions to improve the company's processing and improve their business. But what that SOA strategy enabled them to do was to open up a whole new market for billing. And in this one case, it is a toll road company that allows the telco's customers to charge their toll road costs to their telephone company account, to their mobile phone account. And the services that are being used to do that from the external consumers, the toll road company, are the exact same services that are being used internally, but with just a different set of business policies being applied for how the services are used, how they're secured, how they're controlled. So these APIs that they're built for internal use suddenly enable new revenue streams for the telco externally. So again, we're transforming business. We're doing new sorts of things, and whether you're involved in your particular role as you're planning these new kinds of business initiatives, whatever you're doing with SOA and APIs in your strategy is either moving your organization closer to being able to just flip the switch like the telco did here, apply some new policies, all of a sudden we're in big with the API economy, or not, depending upon how you're designing your services, how you're preparing your infrastructure, and the like. So let's talk some more about what this transformation is like, how to think about the API economy, and then some of the key elements of preparing a service-based strategy for the API economy. So I want to drill in. Yeah, Alistair.
Sorry, Randy, this is Alistair speaking. It's one of the interesting things because, you know, we come from a very heavy sort of SOA background and history to see the differences between SOA and API. And the one interesting thing that you've put forward is we have a different term for that, which is arm's length. In some respects, you know, the relationship that you say that Amazon has developed where the customers choose it is very, very evident, and it sort of highlights the difference between API and SOA. While we tried many, many times to highlight with best practice in SOA that you should be building services as a product and offering that product to a set of consumers, it never quite got there. Whereas with APIs, we definitely closed that gap. And now APIs are seen as products, and it creates this arm's length relationship between a producer and a consumer. We still see a lot of companies, though, pursuing very SOA-like strategies when faced or when looking at the API strategy. And it's kind of an interesting topic for another webinar about how Agile and API development fit together to create this consumer-producer kind of relationship even behind the firewall. Because people still think that APIs and the apps that consume those APIs need to march through the life cycle together. And they probably shouldn't be. So there needs to be this disconnect between the life cycles, or this decoupling between the life cycles of the app and the API that many customers are still not adopting.
Yeah, that's a you know, a good segue into the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is to come back to this concept of you know, is there a different kind of thinking, you know, involved in the Amazon sort of open business approach? And if you look at sort of a traditional business model, and here I'm using business model in a fairly loose sort of way, but you'll get the idea of what I mean here, is that in a sort of a traditional business mindset, what you do is you think of, well, what business are we in? And if we're in that business, who are our customers? And what are the channels that we're gonna reach those customers through? And who are our partners that are gonna help us meet, you know, and reach through those channels? And so great, now we understand how we're going to market with our business. Now maybe opening up something at the edge can make us more efficient, you know, get some value chain integration going and the like. And that's important and good, but that does tend to put the design of APIs, the design of external integration into the context of the particular application or solution, the partner integration scenario and the like. And it's not that you can't, that can't be a preparation for more and different things, but it's not the strongest way to think about it in an open business model. So in an open business model, the sort of chain of thought is instead, well, what business are we in? What kind of competencies do we have? And with those competencies, what kind of ecosystems can we play in? And you know, as either as provider, as partner, as channel, whatever, you know, different roles in different ecosystems, what kind of relationships do we build to operate in those ecosystems and to add value? Then what kind of business connections and what kind of processes are we playing in with those relationships? And now how do we leverage those relationships and connections as fully as possible. Well, the difference between these two is where you start thinking about the need for external connections and how those connections are designed is radically different. Because if you want to just have assets and capabilities that you can bring to market, in a wide variety of different ways in ecosystems and contexts, then you're really thinking about what your core capabilities are and how you can wire those core competencies together differently, very early in the planning cycle versus just very late where you're just trying to make things more efficient. So I think that, Alistair, that plays exactly into the kind of switch that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think there has to be sort of a measured approach with how much of the open model do you adopt even for internal APIs, and what are the lifecycle processes and approvals you need to go through to get there. But I think it is important to decouple the app and API lifecycles and think about your API even internally in this way. I think there's a certain measure of, you don't need to go the whole way internally, but I think that there is a mindset that needs to change.
And yeah, I think it does. And some of the strongest SOA strategies that I've seen even were decoupled from apps and oriented around building services around the key business capabilities that you had. And that's in the telco example I gave. That is the kind of design approach where they, in essence, were focusing on the capabilities and ecosystems, even internally, that enabled them to just be a flip of a switch away from an external ecosystem. But this notion of ecosystems is, I think, that the key word that I tend to focus on with clients as we're building API strategies, and the like. And I think it becomes the key way to think about and understand the API economy. Well, if it's the API economy, then we're centered around APIs, which have an API user on one side, or think of it as a client app developer. But I like the term API user because it's more broad and can be, a client app as in a mobile app, or it can be a website or a business or any number of other different ways of thinking about the user. And then an API provider. The API providers, you can be any type of organization and be an API provider, whether what you have is a service or a product, or you're a nonprofit or a software firm. But some of the major reasons why you might want to be an API provider and some of the value you might get out of it is increasing mind share, like a USA Today or a New York Times who has their content spread farther and wider and therefore has more people noticing and thinking about them. There might be some end customer value where if I enable some developer or some new channel, then it's more value to my customers. Maybe I'm getting indirect revenue because if people are using this API and increasing mind share, then it's bringing more revenue to me. Maybe I'm selling through the API and getting direct revenue the way that Amazon does. Or I may be able to charge for access to the API itself, and this might start to merge into a data economy kind of conversation where I'm selling data through the APIs, but it could be functions as well, something like a Twilio, selling services through the API. So a variety of reasons why you might want to be an API provider. But even as an API provider, you have to think and understand, well, who might my API users be and why might they be interested in using my APIs? And so here, your API users might be customers directly using the API, or it might be influencers of your customers. So you hear the ecosystem conversation takes on a different sort of flavor where you're not just worried about serving your customers, you're worried indirectly about serving those who will influence your customers. Or you can have more traditional B2B scenarios, suppliers, partners, any other sort of stakeholder, And then this last category is a very important one that I believe that Amazon had in mind, but we see, in other contexts, is a digital disruptor, someone who can take your API, combine it with one or two or three or four others, and have some brand new product, service, etc., that offering that hasn't existed before, and you get dragged along in their success. And so these are the kind of roles that might be on the consumer side, on the API user side, where they're getting something they need, or they're adding value to your offerings, or having an API that allows you to participate in an ecosystem or a marketplace in a more direct way, or some brand new business model altogether. But the API economy and how to think about it doesn't stop here. It goes on to thinking about some of the other piece parts that surround the core relationship between API users and providers. And the one that perhaps is least realized, but perhaps most important of the ones that I'm going to draw up here in terms of making sure that it's part of your thinking about the API economy, is adjacent APIs. So the mindset can often be, I'm an API, I'm a company, here's what I have to offer, let me create an API so people can use what I have to offer. And that's okay, but what can be very interesting is to understand, well, they might not want just what you have. They might want what you have only if they can use it in combination with other things. So these adjacent APIs that may be related by process, you're one step in a larger process, or related by package deal. You offer one thing, somebody else offers another, somebody else offers another, but it's the packaging of the things together that becomes very interesting. But adjacent APIs are a very important aspect, because it may mean that you as a provider want to develop go-to-market strategies in concert with other API providers, or that you want to be sure that it's easy for your API users and somebody else's API users to use both your APIs and their APIs. So those are very important. But then around the infrastructure around your APIs, then there are API management vendors that can focus on managing the relationship between API users and API providers. There's broader API and SOA platform vendors. And then there are other players in the market that can help via search or directory features to find APIs, or marketplaces, or other ways to monitor an API, and your API may be being independently monitored by some other organization, or API aggregators. Maybe this notion of an adjacent API plus your API is something that somebody else pulls the pieces together as an API aggregator, and a different channel to market, a different way to combine the API packages. So a variety of different ways.
Sorry, Randy. I think that this is also relevant internally. If a group is looking at internally to create an API management solution, or to deploy an API management solution across the enterprise for different lines of business or departments within that group, I think that they also need to start looking at how they're going to offer some of these other capabilities on that platform. So whether it be orchestration or mashup capability, or introducing adjacent APIs, they need to start looking at themselves, even internally, as a service provider or as a provider of a platform for these kinds of capabilities. Definitely
agree. And as you think about what kind of APIs might we have, I find that there are four major important categories of APIs to think of. You will see three of these in the market, in common conversations across the market. I had a fourth one that I think is particularly important from a planning perspective and from a conceiving of what kinds of APIs are we going to have in the innovation process, and I'll just mention that one briefly. But first, the the greatest amount of conversation is around what I would call open web APIs, also known as public APIs. So the stereotypical example here would be Twitter or Facebook, Google Maps, etc. And here's where you're opening wide open to innovation the way that Amazon did, and all sorts of different kinds of possible API providers, low vetting of API users. I mean, low vetting of API users. You may have certain restrictions you want to maintain in terms of who API users are, but they will be very few. Then there are B2B APIs, and these tend to be bigger value chain kinds of partnerships, and there will tend to be a higher level of vetting of partners in this sort of scenario. You shouldn't think of these two, however, as binary distinctions, but rather as a continuum between the two. And another way to distinguish between them, it might be that with a B2B API, it would tend to be the case that the business relationship comes first and use of the API comes second. With an open web API, use of the API might be the first manner of business relationship that you have with that particular partner. Then there are internal APIs, and the three of these are often referred to as public, partner, and private APIs. And there's another conversation to have about internal APIs versus SOA. We'll touch on that on the next slide. But suffice it to say that the APIs are different in their requirements and their design point. They needn't be layered the way that I show it in this diagram, but might merely be the exact same APIs with different policies applied. The fourth one that I add on is product APIs, and here the design point is how to build an ecosystem around your product and product integration scenarios more so than business integration scenarios. And here to elaborate, I'll just give one quick example. For a hotel firm, via open web B2B or internal APIs, you might reserve a hotel room. A product API, by contrast, would be enabling you to control the hotel room itself, the thermostat, the TV and parental controls, or meeting room equipment in a hotel meeting room. And the reason to have that as part of the scenario, part of your API strategy, is because it opens up new ideas, new possibilities when you think of it in that way and how your products are being used and integrated. Okay, so then let's move to think about strategy a little bit and how to get there. As you look at APIs and SOA and the conversations around them in the industry, there are many ways to distinguish between the two, but the most important thing to first realize is that there is no definition you can give to SOA or APIs that you can go to the market with and expect someone else to be using those same definitions. They're just different definitions all over the place, and so you need to do a definition of terms kind of thing, both for your own internal use of these words and as you go to market and talk to vendors and others about, well, what do they mean by API and what do they mean by SOA? And so the working definitions that I use to guide Forrester clients are to think of SOA as that part of your service-based strategy that is aimed at giving you core business flexibility, and APIs as that part of your service-based strategy that is aimed at extending the reach of that agility to many new contexts. When you look at it in that way, then there's a big, strong core of maturity and elements of maturity that are unified for both APIs and SOA. And the three that I've starred here are the three that I think are most important for longer-term enterprise maturity of your service-based strategy. And that's understanding how business and technology groups work together, understanding how you govern the design of your services over time, so service governance, service design governance, and the platform and tooling that you put together to manage your APIs and services, and how that addresses all aspects of maturity, lifecycle, runtime management, managing relationships between API users and API providers, and the rest. There's a variety of other aspects of maturity, but those are the three that are most important. There are unique aspects for this sort of SOA aimed at core business flexibility, and APIs as aimed at extending the reach of that agility. And so there are other design centers for your service maturity strategy and governance, but those are the key kind of aspects. And Alistair mentioned this product notion with APIs, where APIs can be products in and of themselves, and managed with business people, managing them as an external product with all of the full-on product management aspects. You may not do that or at least not at first, but it is the extent to which you can take APIs and the way that managing APIs and governing them within an enterprise can be different than with SOA. Then API design strategy would be the key aspect to focus on. How are you going to create the APIs? And when I say API design strategy, the key thing here that I'm focused on is there is a broader API strategy context, but in order to know how to design your APIs, both in terms of functional design and technical design, is a domain in and of itself, because the design of your services is really the most important aspect of whether you're going to get the kinds of broad adoption that you intend to get. And it's sort of analogous to within the SOA strategy days and early SOA strategy days of getting set on the right design strategies for services so that you could get the right level of reuse within your SOA strategy. We talked about API categories, and these four major categories that are the business context of API design and use. The next major aspect is to understand that there are different types of APIs from a function, purpose, architecture context. So key questions here are, is it a data-oriented or resource-oriented API where the REST create, read, update, delete model with the 4 HTTP verbs matches the scenario very well? Or is it a transaction-oriented API that really needs more of an action-oriented design to the API? And here I'm probably stepping on some toes of some REST design advocates who say everything should be resource-oriented, but that is just not the best design approach, to try to force-fit everything into a resource-oriented model when many things are transaction-oriented. So you see somebody like E-Trade combines both of those within their API. And both of these can be business transaction oriented. Now, business maintenance, business activity oriented. There are some that will be applied to a particular context, though, like a UI support API or a streaming API. And again, E-Trade has streaming APIs as part of their portfolio of APIs. Only when you understand that. Yeah, Alistair, go ahead.
Okay, and I think the interesting thing here is that there has been a lot of talk recently about API first, and I think that has both pros and cons. So when you talk about APIs to support a UI, that's a classic API first kind of concept. And I think that what tends to happen is people can end up being quite lazy about API first design. They think that they can build an API that's very tightly coupled to a user interface, and hence to the user interface experience, and not really have a successful API. So I think that API first is a good idea as long as you put some thought into the design, But I think that that's another interesting discussion topic, maybe at a later date, is to talk about API first and agility around API design and the API implementation.
Right, yeah. I tend to think function, purpose, context first, and then understand within that do you need to orient around a business unit of work, like submit trade for E-Trade, or get account info, again at E-Trade and the like. But it's only when you understand that you are ready to begin asking questions about the technical design of the interface, and should it be REST or SOAP or WebSockets, and if it's REST, should it be action-oriented or resource-oriented, and a variety of other things like how to handle transactions and other aspects of quality of service, which all have an impact on who and how far the use of your APIs can extend to, because the more quality of service you try to build into your interfaces, the better your business integrity, but sometimes the more tricks there are to using the API correctly. So there's some interplay in there. There are community concerns. If you set limits on the use of your API, or how your testing strategy and your support strategy, are you going to have enterprise level support for APIs, or only community level support, the way that some API providers have, where there's no number to call, nobody to talk to, it's only the discussion forum? Well, these roll back into how simple or advanced your API designs can be. And then you need to understand, are you trying to just do a very open-ended design for your APIs that anybody can do anything? Maybe you don't want anybody to do anything, but in either case you have to be talking about and understanding the portfolio for your APIs. And then these kinds of design questions get wrapped into a larger design context that builds a cycle from business strategy down to and through building a community around your APIs, whether it's an internal community, a B2B community, a broad open internet community with tens of thousands of developers. The stages as you go there are understanding your business. We mentioned before about how important the ecosystems are, and then understanding who's your user audience for the APIs, what kind of programmers, what kind of contexts and requirements. Then you can understand what API products you need to have and how they need to be designed and implemented, and building the community around them is just part of that life cycle. And around this now we have a whole variety of different roles. In with a sort of a core SOA strategy in those days, we didn't have executives and corporate strategy and market research folks involved in designing the context around our SOA APIs. Those were all business strategy, and then later on we got to designing our SOA service interfaces, and that was good. But APIs can bring in a much broader context of roles. Then, understanding this and that the kinds of roles sets a better foundation, for being able to understand what kind of roadmap you'll build for APIs, because it starts with knowing your business strategy and competencies. And here again is a place where, as an architect or developer, you may think this is way outside of your purview to think about, and certainly you may not be the one setting business strategy, but your thoughts and how you're designing your APIs and setting a foundation for thinking about API products and the like needs to be infused with understanding of business strategy and competencies, and the ecosystems that you'll play in, including internal ecosystems, and how will you measure success within those ecosystems, and how you play and add value to ecosystems. From there, then, you can find some interesting API-based innovation to pursue as an initial API-based audience. And here, as I go through this slide, I'm thinking a bit more about external, but but it could be internal as well. So then you define, well, who's our initial API user audience going to be, and what kind of APIs will that audience use? And we get into some what I was talking about simple versus more involved designs with higher transactionality and integrity and the like. So then implement just enough API infrastructure to get this initial bit of APIs done, and then be ready to iterate and mature over the whole of the roadmap. So with that, let me bottom line this into some recommendations, which the first one really is to think in terms of innovation and business innovation with APIs. Drive some conversations in your company that are about, well, why not open our business wide open the way that Amazon did? How can we connect across our ecosystems and drive deeper ways of serving customers? Why not open up something, access into our business that will allow us to ride the coattails of someone else's success, a la the digital disruption model? Then an incremental roadmap, like I was just going through on the previous slide. If you've got some SOA success going now, build on that. That provides a strong foundation. This is not about, rats, SOA was the wrong thing to do, now we got to figure out how to do APIs. No, SOA was exactly the right thing to do, and this is about extending that success in new contexts, new ways, and bring business and technology collaboration on some clear business scenario or scenarios, and experimental scenarios are fine too. Because that may be where you find some interesting new ways to drive digital disruption. And that's what should drive your next round of maturity for API design and infrastructure. But this is all a foundation by focusing on business design, agility built around your core competencies, reaching your customers and somebody else's customers through ecosystems. These are the kinds of transformations that APIs enable. Alistair, thoughts? You want to continue on with some other bits?
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Randy. You can give me control. There we go. So I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on what Randy said and talk about basically this path to digital transformation. And it's really about a life cycle. And in many cases, it's a life cycle from how do I take internal services and expose external APIs? Or how do I build an API ecosystem? How do I create or take advantage of this API economy? And without going into a lot of excruciating detail, I like to divide it up into sort of 4 different parts along this path. The first one is how do you actually accelerate this digital channel? So you're essentially looking at and building an API and creating a new digital channel for your business. It might be something that's internally used or used between partners, or it might be an open API, or it might be a product API. But what it boils down to is a digital channel. And in some respects, it's a new digital channel right next to your website and right next to other digital channels that you have within your business today. But what you're trying to think about is how do you actually accelerate it? How do you actually build these APIs? Once you've built the APIs, how do you actually drive adoption? You wouldn't want to go ahead and build a product and have nobody use it. That would be the very definition of failure. So what you want to do is you want to somehow drive and manage the adoption of that particular API, that particular part of your digital strategy. Then you want to figure out how you're going to make money out of it. So how are you going to monetize that particular API channel, that particular set of digital assets? And you might be monetizing these things directly, i.e. $5 per API call, or you might be monetizing it indirectly, as in increased shoe sales, or whatever the case might be. But somehow you need to be able to monetize your API strategy simply, even if it's just simply for selfish reasons, to somehow declare success. You need to be able to measure and validate your business. And that's the 4th part of it. You need to be able to have visibility into what this API strategy is actually contributing to your business's bottom line. So if I break these different things down, starting with the acceleration of digital channels, You really want to try and delight your customers with an engaging experience on different devices and on different channels. You want to either mobile enable your business or externalize products and create services as APIs and stay ahead of consumer trends. So Randy talked a little bit about a product API, which definitely has a very ecosystem kind of view on the market. Or you're looking at open APIs and you're looking to try and potentially support new channels that you might not have seen before, or support your existing partners with a B2B kind of API. You also want to try and accelerate your time to market and reduce your total cost of ownership by leveraging existing applications that you have internally. And that comes back to Randy's point about leveraging and building on top of an SOA strategy. So how can you take a set of SOA services and a set of back-end applications and expose them as APIs, whichever type of API you envisage for your business? So the kinds of capabilities that you need within an API platform would be things like orchestration, mediation, scripting, caching and paging, and security. These are all things that are going to help transform your internal services into external APIs. It's going to help you with that integration. It's going to allow you to create an API, whether it be from the top down or whether it be a bottom down API first kind of approach. You need some way of getting that API out there. You need some way of decoupling your success as an API product from a turmoil of back-end integration projects. So you really need to have and invest in an API platform that can help accelerate those digital channels. Then you need to drive adoption. So you really need a developer portal. You need some API catalog or developer portal or website where you can actually drive either business partner adoption or developer adoption or some way of building and communicating your value in that partner ecosystem around a set of product APIs. So the kinds of capabilities you need here are obviously a web portal. You need some social capabilities to be able to manage and reach out and communicate with your developers. You need some really hot documentation that developers can easily consume and understand and interact with. You need the ability to create different groups and different levels of visibility and different roles. And Randy touched a little bit on the kinds of roles, but those roles of a product manager and a business analyst and a partner and different kinds of partners and different classes of partners and members of the public and Joe Schimoni's garage, all of these people fit into different kinds of groups with different kinds of roles within the portal, and they all have roles to play in that ecosystem, in that API product. You also need to be able to search both the documentation as well as the blogs, as well as the forums, as well as the marketing content within that portal. Then you need to monetize. And as I said, you might be directly monetizing or indirectly monetizing. But it all boils down to how do you package up these APIs. So if you're creating an API as a product, how are you going to offer it to your partners? How are you going to classify your different partners? How are you going to create different tiers of pricing? What sort of legal agreements are associated with it? So there's the whole concept of packaging an API and promoting it to the outside world. A very simplistic way of looking at it is that you might have an internal service. You might then have to take that service and create an API. Then you might have to take that API and push it into a portal and package it for your audience. So it's almost like a life cycle of enrichment where you're taking a very sort of technical back-end service and going through a couple of different stages of acceleration and integration, then adoption, and finally packaging and monetization of that API. So the kinds of things that you need to be able to effectively monetize a packaged API is licensing. You need to figure out how you're going to license it and what sort of different bands or tiers of performance and access you're going to grant. How you're going to actually do or enforce rate limiting. What are your life cycles and processes around provisioning? And last but not least, again, how that packaging falls back into the documentation, not only the technical documentation, but also the marketing and the whole user experience and the whole brand experience around APIs. And then last but not least, hopefully you can declare success. So you can report on and demonstrate how this is affecting your business. and the value that the API strategy is bringing. You need to be able to provide business analytics. You need to be able to provide operational insights from both an API provider's perspective as well as from a developer perspective. And then you need to be able to see the metrics around the applications that are being deployed, where they're being deployed, and how they are running. And these are the basics that you need to really provide in a platform. And as Randy said, you don't need to boil the ocean from the get-go. You need to basically make sure that you have a set of back-end applications and services that are secure, you've published them, you're encouraging some developer adoption, you have some idea of how to monetize that, at least in phase one, and then you can iterate around that. So when I look at something like this, I definitely see it as a product lifecycle, something that starts off as an idea for a new product within an organization and walks through a productization process before it is exposed to the outside world. Some of the examples along the way, you have SOAP to REST mediation, you have optimization for a mobile platform, you might provide OAuth, you might provide analytics, you might provide API documentation, and these are all steps along the path from taking back-end applications and services, exposing them as APIs, and then connecting your app ecosystem or your partner ecosystem to those APIs. This is just a smorgasbord, I guess, of the kinds of platform capabilities that you should be looking for. So have a quick look on this. I'm not going to read through all of these, but essentially they are core platform capabilities. Then there are things that you need to look at around lifecycle. How do you actually publish an API? What are the processes around that? How do you onboard apps? How do you certify apps? How do you onboard users? What sort of compliance is there? What sort of integration scenarios are there? What sort of internal processes do you need to put into place to support the API portal and the productization of this API portal? Then there are things that are provided by typical gateway products. These are security, authentication, protection, identity integration, and capabilities like that. And then last but not least is the API portal. So I look at this set of capabilities, and you need to look at the set of capabilities as well and figure out how, if they apply to your business, you would be providing those as part and parcel of your API platform and your API strategy. So my recommendation, to leave time for some Q&A, is you really need to establish a digital strategy. It's a holistic thing. You need to look at how you're going to transform your business through APIs. And I don't necessarily just mean external and partner APIs. I'm also referring to internal APIs. We have a lot of customers that see APIs as SOA 2.0. And they are and they aren't. There are some fundamental differences between APIs and web services. It's not a technical difference, it's a philosophical difference. And there is a question related to this, and maybe I'll answer that question there. Then you need to think about how you can actually leverage this digital ecosystem, and that's what Randy was talking about. Creating a partner API will give you so much more than just creating an open API. It's how do you actually build on your business with an API. Not just how do you expose your existing business to new channels, but how can you actually build your business. You also need to build upon your SOA investments. We definitely believe that SOA is a foundational building block for APIs. An API is a productized service, and that is the simplest way of looking at it and the cleanest way of looking at it. You also need to adopt a unified platform strategy for APIs and SOA. They have relationships, they have dependencies. If you commit to 200 transactions per second to a new customer on your API, that is going to have back-end ramifications, and you need to understand them. Then you need to drive developer and partner adoption to ensure success, and you really need to think about how you're going to actually restructure your organization to align with the different roles that Randy mentioned, but also to potentially support the successful strategy. You know, you're going to be getting a whole new business channel. You're going to have to support that channel. You're going to have to market to that channel. And you are going to have to mature that channel over time. And that is going to change your business. If you think about how much Amazon's business has been changed through their website, through EC2, and through their API strategy, they used to sell books. I'm not even sure what they do now. They just seem to do everything. So it's really, you know, come about a complete restructuring of their business. And I think that's it. We can go over to some questions.
Yeah, also, you mentioned that one question that's about API, difference between an API and a web service, and I mean that's in a sense one of my favorite ones because I always want to say, oh, never mind, don't worry about it, because really what it is about how you design your services, and here's where Humpty Dumpty comes back into the picture again. You may remember in Through the Looking Glass, Humpty Dumpty says, when I use a word, it means precisely what I wish it to mean, nothing more, nothing less. And here's what you have to give your own definitions of these, but commonly in the industry, people, by API, they might mean a REST API, and by web service, they mean a SOAP API. I find that to be an incorrect incorrect association of the definitions. We've been doing REST with SOA for more than a decade and the like, and SOA has been external, so APIs are not about external. So yeah, it's a distracting question, really, I think, is what I come down to on that.
Yeah, I wish I had more time to talk about it, but there is a philosophical difference between the implementation of APIs and the implementation of services. When you look at companies that have deployed a developer portal, the companies fall into two camps. That portal is either owned by the development team or product team. And that is sort of the fundamental difference. If it's owned by developers, then by that very nature, the lifecycle of the app is coupled to the lifecycle of the API. And what you really have there is SOA 2.0. If the API portal and that catalog of APIs is owned by a product team, then the API lifecycle is decoupled from the app lifecycle. And people are publishing APIs, and they're publishing them in a very sort of well thought out productized manner, and those apps are then coming in and consuming those APIs. So it's the first slide that Randy presented, I believe, on Amazon. I don't know how you phrased it, Randy, but it's really a fundamental difference in thinking about you will have non-production apps hitting your production API portal and your production API endpoints. And that is a fundamental shift in thinking about how to do app development inside and behind the firewall. And it's worthy of a whole hour's webinar to talk about that fundamental difference.
Yeah, and I agree that most definitely there's a philosophical difference, and from another angle into it, it's a difference between a strong service-based strategy and a weak service-based strategy. But we'll leave that one for another day. There was another question that was about, well, APIs, acronyms, been around for a long time, very specific. Yeah, I entirely agree with the fact that API has a whole other meaning, but it's kind of the terminology that's developed in the industry, and that's why folks like Alistair and I go along with it. It's just like it's out there. It's a term that's being used, and again, define it and understand it. But yeah, let's not get hung up on this on the precise technical definition and the like.
There's another interesting question here, Randy. Perhaps you can answer. Is product API like an enabler of IoT?
I would say that. There's an interesting relationship between the two, but I wouldn't think of product API having any direct association or relationship to IoT. But clearly, IoT-related things are a good place to have product APIs because an IoT-related thing like the Philips Hue light bulb or the Nest thermostat or whatever, it becomes very interesting when you have scenarios that integrate those products with other products. But a hotel room, as in my example, is not really an IoT thing, but it might have IoT things in it or not. So yeah, so I wouldn't draw a direct relation, but there is clearly a relation there.
Yeah, I think IoT naturally fits in with an ecosystem kind of model.
Yeah. There was that one about long-term. Yeah, there's one about a long-term strategy, with business-led opportunity. And does it require a business-led thing to start moving toward APIs? And I think in the broader bits, as we've been focusing on here in terms of, there being a product organization and the like. Yeah, you definitely will need some business involvement to get at that level. But I think a key takeaway from the webinar I would want folks to have is wherever you are, you can be doing two things: laying a foundation with the kinds of services you're building, the kinds of ways that you're designing them and thinking about them, and the kinds of conversations you are driving within your sphere of influence, and whether you are tying the conversations, as you suggested, Alistair, to a particular app that I'm building, and that's what my context for the service, or whether as I'm building this service I am thinking more broadly about my business capabilities as a whole and the possibilities for digital transformation.
Good. I think that covers the majority of the questions, and I think we're also out of time.
Yes, we are out of time. Alistair, do you think you might want to answer some of the remaining questions, perhaps in a blog post or something, just so people can feel like their issues were addressed?
We'll look at that. Yes, I think that's a good idea, Hugh.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for being with us today. We're going to wrap up now, and as we mentioned earlier, in a day or two, a recording link will be sent to you by email if you want to take a look at it again or forward it to anybody. And thank you so much for being with us today.